So Evan, what does being a session player mean to you?
Being a team player, being versatile, and having a great attitude, being able to work with other people in a lot of different environments.
So where did that start for you?
It started my first session ever. Actually, I was probably 10 or 12 years old in Arkansas. It's with a band that I had called The Other Guys. It's a great name, right?
Nice.
It was like a pop punk kind of band.
Uh-huh.
And we recorded with a lady from our church. It had a home studio, had one of those like Boss digital recorders, like 8-channel recorder.
Yeah.
And it was awesome. I love, and it, going back, I don't even know if the record's still on. I'm sure somebody has a copy. I think we did like 3 songs, but whenever we went to go get it mixed and mastered at the same place, the kick drum mic wasn't even on. It was great. He was like, there's no kick in mic here. And then he's like, well, I don't know. But yeah, that was the first session for me. And I kind of got the bug, but I didn't really know what that was, but that was just my first time in the studio.
Like being in a studio.
Yeah.
But you didn't really recognize it yet. Like, dude, you can make a living doing this.
Right. I had no idea. Being a kid in Fort Smith, Arkansas, that wasn't even a thing, that was on the radar.
Where'd your introduction to playing come from?
Growing up in church, my dad would lead worship sometimes at a church. He's a pastor of a church in Arkansas, and I would just jump up on the drums. I was 2 years old, and his band, the church band, was practicing. And this is what this story is how he tells it, is that the drummer went to use the restroom or something, and I just jumped up and started playing with the band, and they didn't know that the guy had left, apparently. They looked back, and they couldn't see me. That to me says the guy was horrible at drums.
Yeah, a 2-year-old taking over his job.
Either that or I don't know. He's probably, exaggerating that story a little bit, but that's what he says. And so, yeah, I just grew up always sitting behind the drummer at church or like the side of the stage, just every week, like Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. It was like all day, every day on those days. On Sunday at least, but yeah, just kind of soaked it in and would hop up on the drums after church, and the drummer would show me some beats and things. We had a drummer at our church named Sam Smith. This was back in the 90s, who was a great drummer. He was like into really cool Afro-Cuban beats and like really interesting polyrhythm stuff. I didn't know what that was, but like Mozambique style. It was like Steve Gadd kind of drumming, and he would teach me all these really cool grooves and patterns that I didn't know were a little bit more advanced, I guess, but just grew up doing that kind of stuff, like for hours and hours after church. I would stay at the church and like hang with like my cousins, and me and my sister, we had a band together back then too. And we'd just like literally jam all afternoon until church started again at 6:30,
Wow. That's awesome.
It was awesome.
Yeah. Well, what a great education being that young, as opposed to just kind of learning like a basic beat, being told to play that. You're getting schooled right away.
Yeah, totally. And I didn't know. I didn't realize that. It was just kind of soaking it all in and just like learning visually and just watching and going, okay, like if he wants to lift the chorus on the last chorus, he'll kind of play more exciting, and you kind of learn how to do that at a young age. It was helpful.
And do you think at that age that you were aware of that, or it's something that you look back on now and like you subconsciously, it just kind of like got into you that you saw he was doing that? Like how was do you remember your mindset around then?
When that young, because then I was probably like 8 years old, or younger than that. So I had no idea what I was watching or like, soaking in. I was just soaking it in. Yeah. But yeah, I could just feel it musically. You could kind of go, and we grew up in a really charismatic church. And so there were like longer music, sections or whatever, like post preaching. And you'd be playing music sometimes for like over an hour while people are just still there, like soaking it up. And so I learned at a young age, like, and it sounds weird. There's probably a good way to say this, but not to like, you could kind of steer the emotion of the room in a direction musically. And I started to catch on to that. I was like, oh, they react to this kind of groove or this kind of, if I throw in this fill or like really play aggressive on this, everybody reacts to it. It gets people excited. So I'm like, oh, okay, there's emotion in this, and you can convey that, and people respond to it.
So really, drums were like from day one or from year two, like your thing. They didn't take a while for you to figure out what it was that you loved doing the most.
But actually, my dad taught me how to play guitar first. Well, drums came natural. And my first instrument was a guitar, and he taught me how to play some guitar and piano. He plays pretty much everything, which was really helpful. I would say, like, for a studio musician, whether you're a drummer, guitar player, bass player, keyboard, whatever, especially for the drummers to learn harmony, learn chordal structure and things like that. That'll just help you so much in the studio. But
right, and that's something that I think the drummers or even like non-drummers, but just people in general, would not necessarily assume that a drummer would be impacted by that sort of information.
Yeah,
and the running joke about all the musicians go in the room,
right, and then there's a drummer. Yeah.
And but it's completely not true, and there's such a impact, and I see that every day on sessions.
Oh yeah,
where it's very clear that the drummer needs to have the chart, and know the so
chord changes.
What are some things that you find are helpful specifically with that? What are you kind of aware of in your mind as you're going through a session based on chordal information versus rhythmic information?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of layers to that. Just from like kind of a business side, if you can write the chord charts down, you can lead the sessions and you make more money.
So there you go.
That's good.
Yep.
And so, I'll write charts, and, I've got studied music theory in high school and in college and all that kind of stuff, and ear training and everything like that. So I can pretty much write out charts without a guitar in my hand, unless it's like a Christmas song, which is pretty intense.
Right.
But there's that aspect of it. You are more likely to be a better producer if you understand chord structure and writing. And those things just, give you more opportunity for passive income later on in your career. But so there's just that in a broad sense. But on a session, you play a little bit differently. So if I'm seeing the chords on a chorus are maybe 1, 4, 5, 1, and then you repeat that. That's the thing. But then the bridge goes to a 2 minor, 1 over 3, 4 into a 5. That's building. That's like you're building energy because the chords are walking up and it's building. So if I even just see that, I know what that needs to do based on the chords. What I need to do on the drums in order to convey that sort of building emotion.
Right.
So that just even seeing that, if it was all just, like a bar of 1 or whatever, like a drummer kind of chart or just the drum notation, which we never have anyways, but you wouldn't really see that coming. You would have to go, you would have to just listen and hear it. So it just makes things move quicker if you can see the chordal shape of a song on a paper. As a drummer, then
you're really aware of the
kind of
intention.
can see like what I would want to do.
Did you have any formal training at any point in your...
I did, yeah. I took one drum lesson when I was probably 10 years old and absolutely hated it. It was awful. I'm like, I'm never going back. But they tried to, because I was already playing by that point. I had my own drum set. I was like playing along to records, and I was like, it wasn't like an ego thing, but I was just like, I want someone to take me to the next level. And they were... And they weren't wrong, but I didn't have the patience for it. But we started back at 0, just on the practice pad with the hands and learning rudiments and things like that. So I did that. I didn't take another lesson until I was probably a senior in high school, and got with a local guy in my hometown named Bruce Fowler. And he was in this incredible like black gospel group. They were amazing. I mean, he would just shred on drums. And so I started taking lessons with him, and we were working, and it was formal in that they were lessons, but it was informal in the way that the approach was. And I think I liked that a lot, So we would learn like Steely Dan, Asia, the Steve Gadd drum solo at the end of the song, which is a famous drum solo on Asia. And we would just break it down, and I learned like every note of it, in high school and that kind of stuff. And I didn't realize, but that was, reinforcing certain techniques that we weren't necessarily talking about, but they were seeping in. And then later on too, got way more into jazz and like New Orleans second line music, like Stanton Moore kind of stuff, and taught myself actually how to like read rhythms and do rudiments. And I had this like notebook of like keeping track of the speed that I was going and all that kind of stuff.
What impact do you think that more technical training that you may not use 100% the style of in a session?
Yeah.
But I'm sure that there's some kind of impact at some point that
those
skills help you with.
100%, man. And to me, it's about versatility. Being a studio guy, especially as a drummer, you're on some sessions, man. I'll be asked, you'll be doing a traditional country train beat. Then you may do like a real heavy rock thing, and then maybe something to where you have, and maybe not all on the same day, but in the same week, be doing a record for more of a Latin kind of artist, and you need to like know certain grooves and be able to know them and know them enough to be able to twist them in like more of a Nashville kind of way.
Would you say that for you personally, the traditional exercises of like the formal training or the example that you gave of just learning a drum solo and through that process, learning what you would learn in those exercises, which one do you feel like is more beneficial, or is there a
I think they're both. It's like all of it at the same time, you know. Really, in college, I had a great drum instructor, Tom Giampietro. We would be breaking down like Stuart Copeland drumming and Elvin Jones and Max Roach and like, you know, Stanton Moore stuff or what, you know, all within the same couple of months, just really broad. And during those same lessons, be doing the Rudimental Ritual, which was this book that has like, you know, it takes like 20 minutes to play. I had to memorize the whole thing, but it's all just rudiments, you know? So that to me was a really good balance of foundational things like rudiments on drums to be able to get your hands and your chops up to speed, your facility. But then at the same time, training your ear to be able to hear things to play, you know, just by listening to a ton of music and a bunch of different styles of music. That was really important, I think, and still is. So that when those two things are meeting together, when your facility and technique and your ear those are all working together, then you're just... And so now to me, it's subconscious, you know, whatever I'm creating on a session, I'm not thinking about anything technical or anything else. I'm just thinking about what's the right thing for the song. And all that stuff comes out. Yeah, it's instinctual.
Which is a conversation that comes up a lot about whether there's a certain skill of that instinct that can be learned or whether it's something that just kind of comes naturally.
Sure.
What's your opinion on that?
I think it's a little bit of both, really. You know, I think the instinct comes out because you've trained yourself, you know, and you put in the thousands of hours in a practice room where it doesn't sound good, you know, but you're building and you're working towards something that later on in the future, you don't want to be thinking while you're playing. You want to just be feeling and expressing it, you know? And that was a big thing that my teacher, Tommy G, was trying to reinforce. He's like, when you're playing, don't think about it. Think about the music. And it's almost like you kind of listen to them. Whenever I'm playing, I try to get into a space or I know it's a really good place I'm in. If I'm able to listen to the entire band almost from outside of where I am, I try to like imagine myself like above the drums or above everything else and just listen to everything that's happening. And so whenever you're doing that, you can't be thinking about, oh, what's my left hand doing? Or I'm going to do this fill, or I'm going to do that. You're just almost like enjoying the music as you're making it, you know? And you can't do that if you're having to think about everything that you're doing. In order to not think about it, you have to spend those hours.
I think
it takes a lot of time.
It does.
It's not easy.
Right.
I mean, everything now is so immediate. Like you can learn something, go on YouTube and find something. Oh, that's how you do this. But that's like nothing compared to the time that you need to spend like really digging in on something. And like on the keys, if you want to learn some gospel chops or something like that, or like how to play some cool 2-5-1 progressions and like they're only going to show you one key and probably one voicing of that, chordal structure. That's just one thing. And that's going to take you a long time to learn that. And then you go, oh, well, I learned that. So now I know that. It's like, well, you know that portion of that thing, but you're going to say you only learned it in C. It's like, okay, cool. Well, this song's in A flat. And you're like, oh God, A flat. I don't know that thing in A flat. I'm screwed. So you don't have it. Right. But if you learn that one thing in all keys and in multiple different inversions and blah, 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 then it's like, okay, now you've got that thing. And that's just one thing.
So a big part of our job is just always learning.
Always.
And so we're talking about your education early on. What are some of the things that you do these days to kind of stay on top of things and stay?
I mean, I just bought like a Stevie Ad rudimental book a couple months ago. And when I have free time, I'm sitting at home with my practice pad and a metronome and just learning new stickings for different rudiments or learning different exercises, keeping me sharp. And I'll literally go on YouTube and look up, some linear drum fill or something like that and just see, oh, is there a new thing out there that I've never, obviously there's like thousands of things out there so it's just so easy to now like keep yourself like growing. And I listen to music every day, even though we're making music every day, all day. Just I always try to not get tired of it, always be curious and always like learning and that's just, I think just having that mindset of like never getting complacent will force you and reinforce you to learn and grow, I love it.
How do you find the balance to do that? Obviously, you're playing on sessions every day. It's a pretty nonstop thing.
What is balance?
So do you, that doesn't exist. So just if you want to be in this industry, just give it up.
Well, I feel like the most important thing is to be really intentional with the time that you have, because it really only takes, say if I'm wanting to learn a new drum fill or something, like I go on YouTube and look up linear drum fill. It really only takes you about 45 minutes to get something, to an hour, maybe. So if you slow it down, figure it out, okay, you can get it pretty fast. So that was just 45 minutes. Like, okay, awesome. I learned something new today. The next day, work on it again for another 45, an hour, or whatever. But I feel like you can get a lot done practicing wise in 30 minutes to an hour if you're really intentional and really focused on whatever it is that you're doing and not distracted by just messing around or whatever. So, for me, the balance comes in being really intentional with my time, like family time, work. Whenever I'm home, I try to just be home and not work. The key word I think is just being extremely focused, knowing what goal you have that you're trying to attain, and just be laser focused on that. And then once you reach that goal, set another one and just set another one after that. And after that, that's kind of my personality too. It's like never really arriving, you're always trying to get better. Yeah.
And I think that idea of never really arriving is a really great thing to kind of dive into, something that I've experienced a lot and that I've seen with the most successful of artists that kind of have anything that anyone might, want, is that we recognize that the joy really comes out of the process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of the doing, not what we get out of it or the accolades or, that sort of thing. All that stuff feels great, but it only feels great in the moment.
Yeah.
And then once that moment's gone, it doesn't exist anymore. Then you got to get back to work.
Yeah.
Again.
It's like,
so for somebody that's trying to figure out their path, I wish that somebody would have told me that early on. It's just focus on what you love and enjoy the process.
That's 100%, man. The joy is in the process of doing it. And now, it is good to take a step back and be like, if you achieve a goal, say like when I played on my first number 1 song, that was always a goal. And when I did that, I was like, okay, I did that. Now what? Yeah. But making that record was awesome and so much fun, and it really is, like not getting lost in the trenches of the moment of like digging in and the late nights and like lugging your gear around town or whatever. And like, that's that's it. That's the dream.
Yeah, exactly.
Which in the moment you're like, man, this sucks.
Right.
But it doesn't, and in the long run,
love.
yeah. And that's the beauty of it all, is just the process.
So once you get out of college, where did your career kind of start taking off as a professional, player?
So I left school in like fall of 2008 was my last semester, and went on tour with a guy named Griffin House.
He's awesome.
Yeah, he's a great artist, kind of acoustic Americana, and we were doing rock clubs, van and trailer, lugging your own gear up, flights of stairs in New York City. So it's like, and I was like 20, 21 maybe. That was the first legit tour that I ever did, where the name is on the marquee, that kind of thing.
Do you remember where that gig kind of stemmed from?
Yeah, it's from a drummer here in town named Will Sales, fantastic drummer that I met when I was, I guess, my first year of college. I was still in Arkansas. Met him at a show that he was playing, and we just stayed in touch. Met, did the whole like, hey man, I love your drumming. Met him, that whole thing,
So you initiated the
yeah, like I went up and like while he was like breaking down his drums, I was like, hey man, my name's Evan. I love your drumming. It just kind of, just picked his brain about certain things. He was using some loops, and I was curious about that, running tracks live. And I was just kind of asking him about that. Like, how do you run tracks live? What are you using as an interface? And like, what software are you using and that kind of stuff.
So when you met Will at that show, you were a kid, you came up and said hey to him.
Yeah.
Was his reaction positive or negative, open to chatting? I feel like a lot of people are nervous about coming up to people and saying, hey.
Dude, I was so nervous. I was like, I was there with one of my sisters, and I was like, I want to go up and talk to him, but I don't know, it's weird, And she's like, just go do it. I'm like, okay. So I go up, and actually, it was funny that I talked to the keyboard player first, his producer here in town, Casey Cooley. I'm like, hey, who's the drummer? What's his name? Would it be cool if I like said hey to him? He said, oh yeah, go up and say hey, whatever. And he's like breaking down his drums and stuff. And we just, just said hey. And who doesn't want to, have someone come up to him and be like, you're amazing. You're awesome. I love your music. Then I was still kind of like reading the vibe without knowing it. But you don't want to like stay too long and talk too much. But just asked a couple questions, said hey, and then we exchanged info and waited a little while after that. I didn't like email him that night and be like, hey man, great to meet you tonight. What about all this and this and this? Like waited a week or two and said, hey man, great to meet you at that show a couple weeks ago. Loved it, blah, blah, like really, it's just being nice.
In most cases, people are going to be really friendly in that.
Yeah.
And really grateful for someone like, mention it to him. And,
totally.
And, and doing that. But I think that folks get a little freaked out about it sometimes. And like, well, I don't want to bother somebody and,
right.
And that, but if, as you said, a lot of this work, or most of the work is coming from word of mouth. And if you want to find those opportunities, find a mentor. And the way to find a mentor is to go up and say, hey.
Yeah. And you'll always wish you would have if you didn't, you know what I mean? And you just don't know what kind of opportunity. If I wouldn't have gone up and talked to him, then I wouldn't have gotten that tour later on in college. And then if I didn't do that tour, then I wouldn't have met another artist that I toured with. And then maybe he wouldn't have started doing recording. I mean, you can trace it back to that one moment where I was like, hey man, I love your drumming. Absolutely. It's crazy. So whenever I moved to town, we just stayed in touch and we would grab coffee and hang and go to Fork's drum shop together. And he was kind of like a mentor for me, which he wouldn't think that, but I thought that, and so he was doing another tour at the time. And he asked this artist, Griffin House, asked him to tour with him because he had played on his records and stuff. And he couldn't do it, but he recommended me for it. And I was like, yeah, I will literally leave college to do this, you know? And so, cause I'm like, this is this huge opportunity, and went out and did it and started to get some more gigs from doing that after that tour. And then some other gigs, and started working with some producers here in town and started to build up sort of, some guys that were calling me regularly to where it made sense for me to stay in town and not tour and was able to support myself just from doing sessions and just things around town, gigs around town. One of the biggest things to be able to get work as a session musician is the word of mouth. Like if you play your butt off and play well, you're a good person to be around, easy to work with, you show up on time, you don't smell bad. Just kind of basic things like that, hygiene, because you're in a small room sometimes with people for a lot of hours. Right. It's surprising how little things like that, like literally just like being on time, being early, actually, sounding good, all your gear works, especially for guitar players, because when you play live, you don't hear the buzz and the crackle or the whatever. Then when you show up to a session, it's like everything's under a microscope and you hear everything. And you go, I don't know, this was working great last night, but then like a whiskey got poured on it or something, and you go, but just making sure all your stuff works in the studio, because it's truly under a microscope. And so you hear everything, and you don't want to be the guy that's holding everybody up because your stuff is broken or whatever.
Do you remember where some of those first sessions started to come from?
Yeah. So there's a producer, Nielsen Hubbard, who's awesome. He had a studio in East Nashville, and he had a drummer that he was working with that was getting out of the music business and going to law school. He just kind of he was done, and he was looking for a new drummer to be kind of his guy. And we got in touch with each other, and hundreds of records together early on. And there was a really, really good schooling in a way of doing sessions. And I was watching him, he was engineering, and I'm watching him place mics on things and what he's doing with EQ and certain pieces of gear, the character of the compressor and how that relates to the drum sound. So I'm just like soaking all this information in just by watching. And so then I started to buy a couple microphones and like a couple of mic pre's. And so I was just recording myself in my bedroom, kind of like playing along to other records, but trying to get unique sounds and trying to like just double what the drummer was doing and try to get tighter with your playing. Because in the studio, especially in Nashville, you don't want to be all over the place timing wise. You don't want to be too loose and all that kind of stuff, especially with pop country stuff. Usually we're playing to loops, and it needs to be like, pretty close to the grid. Not realizing I was working on those things. It just came out of the passion for wanting to do it, And so started to learn how to
And that was recording yourself.
Recording myself, really, yeah. So I started to learn, if I put this mic here, it sounds like this. But I was recording myself in high school, too, in my bedroom with like 4 mics on one of those old Tascam recorders, the blue ones. I think it was like 4 channels.
I had one of those.
Yeah. So I'd be like playing along to a John Mayer record or something and hearing the sounds. I'm like, God, why did my drums sound so bad? Like I put a mic on it here. I saw a picture of how they did. They put the snare mic there. Like I had no clue about EQ and compression and any of that stuff.
Or acoustics.
Or like treatment in a wall. I mean, it was truly like a square wall with like plaster, And I'm like, man, this just sounds so bad. Why does it sound so bad? But I learned, how to kind of tune drums to make them sound different to a microphone, because drums sound different in a studio than they do live. And they sound different in literally every studio, just about, and to different mics and to different rooms. And so you have to learn how to tune your drums to the microphone, not necessarily to your ear next to the mic, because it's shocking. And it takes a while to learn, because it's kind of trial and error. And the more you do it, the more you learn what to do in order to get the drum to sound a certain way, and what drums sound a certain way, and what heads make the drum sound a certain way, and muffling. So
how would you say you started to learn that?
Just
Obviously
working with really good engineers.
Like. Gotcha. And do you ask questions of those engineers?
Yeah, totally. Like working with Vance Powell early on, and he had a kit set up, and it sounded awful, like just like trash. You would hit a tom in the room and it would just be like, and I'm like, okay, well, we got to fix that, And he's like, no, don't touch any of the tuning. I like how it sounds. And I was like, okay, I won't, whatever. And I put some headphones on and hit it, and it was like, ooh, and it sounded incredible. It was one of the best sounding kits I've ever heard. And that was a big light bulb moment for me of going, oh, okay. The way that it's translating into the control room, into what's actually, what everybody's going to hear is drastically different, And it's not like that all the time. A lot of times you kind of know what you're getting. But in that moment, I was like, wow, okay. So if I want that sound, I got to make it sound like that. This is going to be tough. But I just learned, okay, work with the engineer, trust them. They've got a process, and we'll work together and figure it out. Especially with toms and snare drums. A snare drum will ring so much more. You don't realize how much it's ringing when you're playing live, because it's not bouncing back from anything. It's just going out there, into space. In a studio, you have walls next to you, and you got a microphone right on it. And it's just a way tighter environment. So any ring is really accentuated. And so learning how to dampen that, but not lose the life of the snare drum is something that, I do that every day. You just try different things, move moon gels or tape or whatever, and the way you hit it and tune it.
So what would be the strategy in that process?
The strategy for me is just to not be afraid to be patient with yourself and be patient to go, okay, this may sound weird right now, but we'll find it. It's going to sound good. A lot of times, if you want a little bit of a ringier snare, but you don't want it to sound ringy in the track, tune it to the key of the song or some sort of fundamental note, like either the 1 or the 5 note within the song. And then when the guitars start playing and the bass starts playing, you sort of don't hear the ring as much. You just hear the attack. And that helps a lot. I'll throw a wallet on the snare drum if I want it really dead, or tape. Gaff tape is your best friend as a drummer, in the studio. If the toms are too ringy, if they're ringing out too long, I'll tape the bottom of them up rather than the top. Because taping the bottom of them, this is a little studio secret here for you. But if you actually tape the bottom of the head, it alleviates the length of the note ringing out, and you don't lose that really nice attack from the top head. So I'll experiment with that and moving that tape around actually under the bottom head. I mean, it's shocking how little of a move you can make will make a big difference, right? To the control room. You really have to do it a lot and just try things out. That was huge for me. To be a studio musician and to already be recording myself at home was just good practice, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in college, too. I went to Middle Tennessee State, and they have a great recording program there. And so I would do projects with different artists or, guys that were wanting to produce or whatever. They would call me in, and we would do these like late. They had the studio from midnight to like 8 a.m., I think is what it was. Yeah. So it would be, you'd load all your stuff in and they spend an hour and a half trying to like get signal to Pro Tools.
Just figure out how patch bay works.
It's like on the phone with the professor at midnight going like, I can't get this kick drum. It's like, well, is it patched in? They're like, oh, there's a patch bay. But then you learn how to tune your drums to the studio in those environments. And it's not like stressful. You're working on a major label project and you've got to like get it now. It has to already be there before you start tracking.
Right.
You don't want to be in over your head, because then you're not going to get called back if you're not ready for the gig.
I think there's something that comes up a lot with players when they're trying to get started where they feel like they're in this tough spot. They can't call a studio and get work because they don't have any experience, but they feel like they can't get experience without, getting work.
Right.
When the reality is, in the modern age, we all have the ability to save up a little bit of money, go buy an interface and a few mics, put them in a room, and start practicing.
Totally. And it's so easy now. It's so easy because everything sounds great. Like all the cheaper gear. I mean, it sounds, not maybe great, but like
a lot better than the cheap gear.
A lot better, dude. A lot better. And now you have a laptop. My God, like that you can have Logic on or Pro Tools or whatever. And there's so many plugins within all that. There's literally no excuse for anybody now. You don't even need $1,000 and you can like record yourself at home and it could sound good if you just learn how to EQ with the free EQ that comes in it, I remember when I had Pro Tools, it was literally just EQ7 and Bomb Factory 76. I think we're like in Deverb.
Yeah.
God
Those
bless
are
Deverb. That was pretty much it.
Uh-huh.
And but granted, I didn't even know how to EQ or what to EQ or anything then anyways. But if you just learn, especially if you're wanting to record and engineer yourself at home, which I do that a lot as well as recording at other studios where I'm not engineering or touching any knobs or anything. But I just love to engineer and get drum sound. I love it, because you can be so creative with it and make even more of your own stamp on the record because you're in charge of getting the sounds on drums. It's such a big part of it, And to experiment with that and be creative with it is just another aspect of your identity as a musician, which I think is cool, Yeah. And so learning how to do those basic things like EQ and compressing and mic placement and having a good sounding drum. It all starts with the drum. Well, the drummer, then the drum. It's like you work out closest to the source and then the furthest out. So get the drums dialed, get your mic placed on it properly, which is shocking how much that makes a huge difference.
Oh, yeah.
A good mic or a decent mic pre. It doesn't even have to be good, for someone that's starting out. And then, just learning how to EQ. I would say learning EQ, reductive EQ, especially at first, is a big deal for a drummer that's wanting to record at home, because there's going to be some weird frequencies probably in your room that you'll have to knock out. But yeah. That'll take you pretty far.
Right. So when you first started getting into sessions, do you remember any of those like lessons aside from like etiquette that you started to learn right away about your process?
Yeah, for sure. So I started working with a guy, Ilya Tashinsky, doing demos, country demos on Music Row.
That was a proven ground for a lot of guys.
Yeah, I mean, that was like, session guy university for a lot of people, right? Because there was so much of it, and there still is. I learned how to communicate with producers, artists, engineers. There's almost a language that you use in the studio that you don't realize you're using it until someone goes, "What are you guys talking about?" Like, I have no idea what you guys are saying. But so the more you're around it, the more you do it, the more you pick that up. My dad being a pastor of a church, I watched him speak to people just one-on-one and like reading people's body language in a way. It's just like having a conversation. I'm just kind of I'm in tune to the vibe in the room in a way of like, this person, the artist, isn't saying anything, but I think they're not digging this. They're a little bit unsure. You can kind of tell they don't like it, but they don't know why they don't like it or what to say to get it to where they would like it. So I'm just like always reading the room. I think that's important for a session musician to learn how to read the room. It'd be like, should I shut up right now? Or should I maybe say something and help kind of move this along? If obviously you see a problem that's happening, they're not digging it, but nobody's doing anything about it. Maybe you should speak up and say something. And then that writer or artist or whoever will go, "Oh my God, thank you so much. I love you. You're amazing. You helped us get to where we wanted it to be." Then you start to build up trust with people, and then they trust you and you trust them. And you're all trying to get to this end result of a great song. How you get there is a million different ways. I think once you check your ego at the door, it's a lot easier for everybody,
No, that's a challenging thing as a creative.
Yeah.
Because especially when you're at a point where you feel very confident in your instincts.
Yeah.
So you've done all of that practice, you've worked it out, you've had a lot of experience, and you're at a point now where you feel very confident in the gut reaction that you might have to something.
Yeah.
But you may be in a situation where the artist may not agree with that gut reaction.
Right.
And then you have to decide, do I help them kind of try to see the light with it because I believe that it's going to help make a better record at the end of the day? Or do I step back and do that? And what goes through your mind when you're in a situation like that?
That's a fantastic question because that happens on literally every session, It depends on what my role is that day. If I'm just the drummer or if I'm band leading, being the go-between from the band to the producer. Say I'm just the drummer that day and whatever idea I have, they're not digging it. That's fine. I don't care about that because I've got like a bazillion other things I could do, and it's not my record. It's their record. And once we're done with it, I don't sing that record. I don't go out and tour that record for 2 years, right?
Right.
So I want them to be happy.
Our names go on the back.
Yeah, exactly. Being a studio musician, you're really like in the service industry at the end of the day because you are serving the artist, the song, the producer. And so if you make them happy, they'll call you back, right? Now, granted, it's tough if somebody asks you to play something that is just so wrong and just not right. And it's like, you think in your mind, oh, this is going to make me sound like an idiot. What are people going to think if they hear that this is me playing on this record, blah, blah, blah. All those things start to go through your mind. And then so you start to get a little bit defensive about it. And you go, no, and what you don't want to do is argue with them about how their idea is bad, So if say I'm just the drummer and we're not really agreeing on something, I'm trying something out and they don't like it, then I'll try something else. And if they don't like that, then I'll try something else. And then I'll ask, so what are we trying to convey? What are we going for? What's kind of the overall vibe that we're wanting here? And maybe that's enough for me to get that information and then I can play that. And maybe they don't know how to communicate what to play on it. They just go, I don't like that. Then it's like, then I go big picture and go, well, what do you want to convey in this section of the song? Or, is there an emotion or a vibe or a reference maybe of a song that you like on this part or whatever? And then it's like, it's never not gotten to the point to where they've liked it, so we always get there. It's just kind of people communicate in a different way. And my job is to get it out of them what they want sometimes if they're not immediately enjoying whatever we're doing. And so, yeah, I mean, it's really hard to do to remove your ego because sometimes your ego is what drives you to be better and you hone your craft and you're good and you have that confidence in you. But being confident in yourself is also knowing that you don't have all the answers and that's okay. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so you can kind of remove that sort of I have to be right kind of mentality and go, no, at the end of the day, what we need to do is make this song awesome.
And I imagine sometimes you just have to wait for them to realize that you're right too. Right. Which often happens, Yeah. And that'll happen with me too. As a producer, I'll have an idea in my head or something, and I just need to hear it to know whether it's wrong.
Totally.
And if I don't hear it, then I'm going to be wondering if it was the right thing or not.
Yeah.
So, see, we got to speak up, and the whole idea is for us to explore and be creative and experiment, But then there's plenty of times where that idea is not right and it comes back to whatever the player's instinct was and that ends up being the right thing.
And that's cool.
And that's great. But we all feel good because we investigated.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's like having a healthy conversation. And it goes both ways. There are a lot of times where I'm like, that's not what I would initially play, but this is going to be really cool. And then then I absorb that and go, oh, that's awesome. That worked on this. I'm going to use that now on another
that could be an approach in a similar scenario.
You just stay open to the possibilities of whatever it could be rather than get defensive. And
so we're paying attention to feelings and emotion in the room. But what are you paying attention to musically in the other chairs as you're deciding what part to play?
To me, it doesn't really start from like the bass, or whatever. I think whenever we sit down and run through a song, I'm listening to, like, it's all subconscious, but if I was like to really break it down, a lot of times I'm listening to the guitar player's right hand and the acoustic guitar player's right hand. And the bass usually kind of goes to the drummer, the bass player will kind of follow that lead. But man, really, I'm listening to the vocals a lot, like the phrasing of the vocal, where there's space, where there isn't space, if there's any sort of rhythmic accent that the vocal's making in a chorus or wherever. because then I'm making drumming moves based on that to give the song more identity.
And when you're thinking about the vocal, does thinking about the vocal tell you where to make accents, or does it tell you where the foundation of your groove is at?
I think both. I think the vibe of the song and the style of whatever the track is kind of tells me what snare drum to use, what pattern to play, how much energy it needs, how much vibe, restraint, dynamic, specific fills and things like that, to me comes from the vocal phrasing. And a little bit goes a long way with that. You know, even just hitting one thing with the vocal in a chorus, like maybe especially at the end of a chorus or at the beginning of a second verse, those are some really good spots to kind of pay attention to, or the bridge obviously too. But yeah, you don't want to overdo it because then you're just playing on top of the vocal and it gets too busy feeling. Right. And you don't really know why if you're not aware of that's why, you know, because you just need to be the foundation. But then just a couple little accents here and there will just like make it pop, you know?
Right.
Yeah. And then it goes a long way.
Yeah.
Balance wise, like truly physically playing, most live drummers have a real heavy right hand, and that's bad in the studio because hi-hat is awful in a track. You don't want too much hi-hat. There's a mic on it, so they can turn it up if you want. But so learning how to balance yourself, you know, it's okay to hit the snare drum pretty hard, but then sometimes not too hard. It's all about control. So having a good balanced kit when you're balanced sounding volume-wise, when you're just sitting down and playing, to where if it was just the overheads, everything sounds pretty balanced, you know? A lot of guys don't hit the toms hard enough and they don't speak, you know, because you're playing live, it doesn't matter as much. I mean, it does, but like when you're in a rock band in high school or something, no one's going to be like, can you hit the toms a little louder or whatever? No one's thinking about that stuff. But in the studio, you hear it immediately and you go, well, now we got to throw samples on that. And that's fine now, but
probably one of the most common things that I see happen with like young bands that will like come into a studio and play. Yeah. That like the toms are can sometimes be indindistinguishable when they're doing like runs that roll like a fill, you know, and going through. And like, I know that I can hear in the room that he hit the floor tom, but the floor tom mic didn't like pick up anything.
Dear God, hit the dang thing, right? Just like own it, dig in, just mash it on there.
Right. But now, then the cymbals may be a different approach.
Cymbals, it's all about balance. And this takes a while to learn and to do. And this comes from, again, recording yourself at home so where you can hear the balance of it. If the cymbals are too loud, you know, check your mic placement and make sure they're not too low, but also try to play whatever you're playing without, you know, with hitting the cymbals not as hard. So yeah, like learning how to have that energy in that just really intense feel where we're hitting the toms hard and then not as hard on the crash without speeding up or slowing down, right? You know, and that's tough to do. It's not easy.
So when you're getting your drum set ready, I mean, these days you have cartage, you got folks that are bringing it to you, but what advice would you give for how to prepare your instrument for bringing it into a studio?
Hey, just make sure your gear works first. Make sure you have all the things that you need, like a hi-hat clutch. You literally can't do a session if you don't have a hi-hat clutch. Just one, which is one little thing that you kind of need, but it makes a big difference. Making sure your heads, maybe if they're old, that's a sound, right? Just like, so knowing, okay, if my drum heads are old, that's a specific sound that's going to be a little bit more dry and dead. If the music wants that, then leave those old heads on there. But if you're doing something that's more pop rock or a little bit more lively, you're going to want some newer drum heads on there, top and bottom. Making sure you have the right gear for the session that you're doing. So if I'm going into a record that's more singer-songwriter, Americana, a little bit darker, I'm not going to bring my big like USA custom kit that's got like, you know, a ton of toms and it's real punchy and like real heavy sounding. It wouldn't be right for the session. I would bring maybe my 60s Ludwig kit that's a little bit warmer and more, you know, suited for the music. So just kind of having a conversation maybe with the producer or the artist, whoever's hiring you. Hey, what's the vibe of the music we're going for? And you can tailor your sound to that so that you're already at that next level whenever you get there. So you don't have to work as hard on the day of the session, because you're going to be most likely loading in your drums, setting them up. So you're going to get there early. Another big piece of advice is if you can load your drums in the night before, do that. I know it's extra work and all that, but the drums usually need some time to settle in to the air pressure in the room. I know it sounds crazy, but the humidity of the room, the temperature of the room, it drastically will affect the tone of your drums. So if they have a little bit of extra time to sit in the room overnight, everything's going to sound better the next day.
It's great to have multiple drum kits and all kinds of different gear to be able to use in an ideal world. But for someone that's just getting started, they may not have that whole arsenal of things.
Yeah.
So what are some tips for how you can change the tonality of the drum that you're playing?
A Black Beauty, a Ludwig Black Beauty 6.5 by 14 was the first legit snare drum that I ever bought. It can be really versatile. You can if I wanted the like kind of sound, like real dry, short, dead, low, like tape up the top head, maybe put a wallet on it, but you don't have to. Gaff tape, and there's a lot of different styles of how to use gaff tape. Jeff Porcaro would like kind of roll it up to where it's like sticky on both sides and then just like place it in certain spots on the drum. You can do that and then maybe tape over that too to make it even more dead if you want, if it's ringing too much. And then this is a nice little trick. If you detune the lugs that are like closest to you when you're sitting down, the ones that are like, closest to your body, like those two lugs right there, you can like take them off basically. Just detune them all the way to where you're getting some like wrinkles on the snare head. That will immediately give you a sound. And that's like, and then if you want more of a rockin' kind of like Dave Grohl, Foo Fighters sound with that same drum, take all that muffling off, crank it back up with the lugs. And I like to make sure that all the lugs, wherever the head is on the drum by the lugs, they're all like the same tone, the same pitch. So if it's like bing, 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 like I would tune that other one up a little bit to where it matches it. That's just going to help the drum to speak better and less funky overtones. And so I would spend time on this if I would, any advice to younger musicians or older musicians or whoever, if you're wanting to learn some of this kind of stuff, spend just hours at your house tuning the drum differently. And if you can record it at your place, then do that, because then it won't just be your ear. Like, remember I was telling you it sounds different to a mic?
Right.
Then you'll actually get the legit feedback of, wow, that sounds different. If it's ringing too much, a lot of times I find that to dampen the ring the most, and granted, every drummer is going to have a different way of doing this, but if you dampen the drum away from you, like along the rim that's like furthest away from you, along that side of the drum, like over, like I was saying, to detune down here if you want it like real splatty and deep and gushy, to get that more rocking thing, crank it back up, make sure all the lugs are even. And if it's ringing too much, I like to start dampening away from me. And that, I think, evens it out. Because sometimes if you dampen too close to you, it'll choke the drum too much. So I start away and work my way back in if it still needs some dampening. But all that stuff, I mean, it's so specific and it's different for every drum. You just have to use your ears. I think that's the biggest thing, is use your ears, tinker, tweak, and figure it out. And some random thing might be the thing that makes it sound awesome. That you're like, I don't know what just happened, but I'm leaving it.
So something might be a little easier to have a couple different options for would be like cymbals or hi-hats.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on do you use the same ones all the time? Do you switch them out?
I switch them out every song, literally just about every song. Right. So I like
what goes through your mind when you're doing
that? Just for me, I'm trying to convey a sound, based on the style of the song that we're working on. Thinner cymbals aren't as loud and they're a little bit softer to the ear. So if the music is a little bit softer and more chill, then I'm going to use a little bit thinner cymbals. And all this stuff is truly at the taste of the drummer, but I like bigger cymbals. I think they sound cooler, and I don't like to hit my cymbals super hard in the studio because it takes over the overhead mics, and it's just like becomes too cymbal heavy and just too harsh, you know? So bigger cymbals, you don't have to hit as hard and they speak really well. And I like the decay. It's musical. So like 20-inch crash, 24 ride, maybe. I don't think I use anything under a 20-inch crash. I mean, I've got some 19s and 18s, but when I was younger, it'd be like 14-inch crashes. Just like, but you know, I didn't realize the more I recorded, the more I started doing that, I started realizing, oh, it sounds cooler if you don't beat the crap out of your cymbals. And then so now the snare drum's louder and that sounds good. You know, also too, you can tape up your cymbals if you want less decay, tape up the bottom of them and it'll choke the decay the further you get into the further out you go, actually, it'll choke the decay, like further out of the rim of the cymbal. I've done that a lot of times. You know, if I want a drier sounding cymbal, just tape it up. You know, it's crazy.
And similar with hi-hat too? Like
hi-hat for
bright,
sure.
Dark.
Yeah, bright.
Any techniques you use with getting a tone out of the?
Sometimes I'll put like a tea towel on if I want it super dry and no overtones. If they're compressing the drum sounds quite a bit. Sometimes I'll tape them up. I'll start with the tape, gaff tape on the top. That'll darken it up a little bit. Just like a strip of tape, you know, like maybe that, you know, not that much. And it'll, okay, that sounds better. Great. Awesome. If I want it super dry and dark, putting like a towel on the hi-hats, I mean, that's getting pretty drastic, but I've done it before and it sounds cool. Also, you can put those like little goat hoof things, you know, those goat toes, and then just they're touching the cymbal and it kind of darkens it up a little bit. And it's like a filter on the hi-hat. It's wild.
How important is the consistency of where you hit the drum?
Very important. If you looked at my drum heads, it would be like, you know, like you try to have like that little of a space, you know, the stick mark on the tom, you know, because the drum sounds different whenever you hit it differently on the head. And with toms, I find that the best place to hit it is just straight up in the middle, the center of the drum, for just your basic tone. You can get a cool kind of Motown vibe, like that, like Benny Benjamin, guys like that, would hit the tom on the rim of the tom and the tom head at the same time, and it gives it a cool kind of funky thing, but doing that on purpose, not on accident. So you know how to do
That's
that.
the idea, is being intentional.
Yeah, you're doing that on purpose. And with snares, you know, it gets more ringy the closer to the edge of the snare you hit, you know, whenever you hit it. It's more ringy on the edge, a little bit drier in the center. And if you don't hit the rim with the stick, like the rim and the head, if you just hit the head with the top of the stick, it's going to be a little bit less aggressive and there will be less ring. But if you want it to really like smack and rock and be aggressive, you know, you can do a rim shot, what people call it, where you're hitting the middle of the drum and the rim of the drum at the same time. And it's like really loud. And that's pretty much every time I hit the snare, I'm doing that. I've heard of guys like drawing maybe like a quarter size dot on the drums. And like, I mean, that's over the top, but it gets you focused on, okay, I'm only hitting that one spot. And if you were to look as a drummer, if you have clear heads or coated heads, you can kind of see it easier on coated heads. You can see the stick markings on the drum. If they're all over the place, then that's not good. That's bad.
You got to put a target on it.
Bad. So you want to tighten that. We'll call it dispersion. Like in golf, you know, like if you're spraying the ball everywhere, you want it to be landing in the same spot all the time. So the goal would be to tighten up that stick marking, you know, kind of stuff. So get some new heads, change them out. You can really see it. You can see it on clear heads too, but it's really obvious on coated heads. I want to look at the transients in Pro Tools. I want everything for me, but especially like kick and snare within a section of a song to be the exact same every time, unless, you know, there's a subdivision, there's an intentional, A lot of times the fills will be louder, but that's what gives them more energy, right? It's because I'm trying to give it more energy and playing louder. Then you can look and see, oh, is my kick drum, is it like quiet and then loud and then kind of loud and then like just some weird flubby like flam thing because the beater's hitting the head while I'm in the middle of the groove. Like you don't want any of that stuff. It just clouds up the mix of the song.
Right.
And it's better, it's punchier, and it sounds more professional if it's even and balanced. And those are things that you don't think about as a kid.
Right.
Because you've never had to think about it, right?
And you really wouldn't until someone tells you.
Yeah. But if someone like watching this, obviously, you can go, okay, that's something to pay attention to. That sets you apart and you move a little bit further than someone else that hasn't watched this, which everyone should.
Well, thanks, man. The knowledge that you shared today was amazing. I know people are going to really enjoy it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being here, and we look forward to talking to you more, getting in more depth into all the other stuff that you're involved in.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Man.